This week on The Comic Box, DC Rebirth, the biggest jam cover in comics history, and as always, Hell Hydra. Comics. Hey everybody, and welcome to The Comic Box, or if somebody tries to sue me, Rob's Comic Box. This is the newest addition to the Geek Podcast Network, which includes the Geek podcast and the Video Game News Now podcast. So before I even jump into things, a big thank you to Void and Beej for letting me join their podcast network. This is my first podcast, so be kind. Here's how this podcast is going to work. First, I'm going to throw some headlines at you, some things that popped out at me that I think any comics fan would be interested to learn. Next, I'm going to go over some quick reviews. I haven't decided yet if it's going to be just one review or if I'm actually going to take the time to tell you about every single comic I've read that week. Some weeks there's a lot I read, some weeks there's only a couple. So I'm sure that's going to change as the podcasts go on. Then we're going to do the poll list. I'm going to tell you some of the comics that I'm looking forward to coming up. And then finally we'll jump into the topic of the week. This week, that topic is DC Rebirth. But first, let's talk some news headlines. Warning, spoilers ahead. So the first big one, and this I even saw on Facebook, on my Facebook feed where they have the headlines on the side there. Captain America, Steve Rogers, issue number 1. We have 2 Captain Americas out there now. Falcon is still going on as Captain Falcon, Falcon Punch. He is still Captain America. He bears the shield. But Steve Rogers is back in action. And the big twist from this week's issue, or I suppose it would be this month's issue, the number 1 issue, is, spoilers kids, spoilers, 3, 2, 1, Captain America is a Hydra agent. The last words in that issue are Hail Hydra, after he throws Jack Flag out of a plane. Poor Jack Flag. Dude was part of the Guardians for like half a minute. So he had his time in the sun, I guess. I don't know. Maybe they thought he looked too much like Grifter over at DC with the whole hanging of the like hanky in front of your face as a mask, which really I don't even how does that, like, you turn your head fast and they see who you are. So I don't get it. But there you have it. Captain America, now a Hydra agent. Next up, staying over at Marvel, X-Men Apocalypse. Early reviews are coming in and they are not great. It is currently sitting at a 49% on Rotten Tomatoes. So maybe it's just that they're too earnest. They're turning into the Expendables movies. It's a bunch of muscle-bound people dressed fairly similarly, running around blowing things up, and people just aren't getting enough feels out of it as they are versus some of the Marvel movies like Civil War or, Winter Soldier. Last piece of news from Marvel is they're releasing sort of a new line of comics that they're calling Timely Comics, which, if you are a Marvel fan, you will know as the original name of Marvel Comics. And so Timely Comics, it looks like they're just going to be reprints of sold-out comics or jumping on points. So next week, we are getting a Timely Comics Daredevil and Doctor Strange issues, and they reduced the book's price to $3 instead of if it's $4 or $5 or whatever it might be, and it's meant for onboarding new readers. So if there's a book that you would like to catch up on before you dive into an existing series, these Timely Comics, I'm assuming they're only going to put out one for each. So keep an eye out for that. That might be something that'll help you figure out whether or not that's a series that you want to jump into. Over at DC, obviously, the big news is a ton of stuff coming out of DC Rebirth, but that's going to be our topic of the week. So I'm going to put a cork in it until a little bit later. For Star Wars fans, I know Void and Beej, big Star Wars guys, they are doing a comic book adaptation of the Star Wars Force Awakens film. A preview was released this week, and I'm not a huge Star Wars guy. I really liked Force Awakens. I've never been a fan of comic book adaptations, but that one's on its way, so maybe it's based off of an original draft of the script, or at the very least the shooting draft of the script, and oftentimes those adaptations, either in novel or comic book form, will actually include scenes that ended up being cut out of the movie because it was still shot, so it's all still based off the same script, but in the film, they have to cut down for time or content or flow, but some of those things might still work in a written format. So I'm not saying it's going to have deleted scenes in it or extra information, but you never know. So if you're a Star Wars fan, if you really liked Force Awakens, I'd at least hop online, take a look at the preview, and maybe it's something you'd like to pick up. Over at Valiant Comics, which made a return recently, Exo Manowar number 50. The cover is said to be the biggest jam cover in comic book history. For those that don't understand the lingo, a jam cover is when multiple artists are working on a single piece. So it looks like that's what they're doing here, and since it's issue 50, they claim they are going to have 50 different artists working on this cover, which would then make it the biggest jam cover in comics history. All right, now let's move on to last week's comics. But warning, full spoilers ahead for everything. It's hard to do reviews without spoilers. I suppose a more talented person could do it, but the notes I have are very specific to the stories. So we're going to start with Captain America Steve Rogers number 1. This is not going to be a book I'm going to read going forward, but it was a number 1. I like just seeing what's going on, and of course it had that big twist in it. Had some problems with it. The Red Skull seems to have a new role, and not to draw any parallels with any existing presidential candidates, but he really seems to be talking about people invading the country, people ruining what America is, and patriots ending up having to pay the price for other people. But I don't think anyone is going to buy that there's a dude with a thick German accent and a red skull for a head, and that anybody's going to be like, you know what? This guy. And lastly, on this comic, the other thing that sort of I thought was odd is there's this memory that runs along the main storyline, and it's Steve Rogers as a kid, but it follows his mom. We find out that his dad is sort of a drunk, kind of a loser, abusive, and so Steve Rogers' mother makes friends with another rich woman who, you know, shows her a good time, takes her out on the town, buys her a really nice dinner she couldn't normally afford, and then hands her a thing saying, it's a social club that we're a part of. And it's the frickin' Hydra logo with the skull and the octopus legs. And it's kind of like, I don't know if that's meant to be like an implanted memory, and that's why Steve Rogers appears to be a Hydra sleeper agent or whatever. It's comic books, okay? Suspension of disbelief, but I'm picturing a woman in the 20s being handed a piece of paper with a skull on it and octopus legs and being told, it's a social club. You should swing on by, and not immediately being like, well, you're in a cult. Have a nice day, and going about your own thing. So I don't know. But again, that's Steve Rogers number 1. I'm sure my review has really made you want to go out and buy 6 copies and give them to your friends. Seriously, though, if you want to know what's going on with the Steve Rogers version of Cap, pick it up anyway. Read it for yourself, and hey, let me know what you think. Next up for Marvel, I read Doctor Strange number 8 and Mighty Thor number 7. Both are written by Jason Aaron. I'm digging the Doctor Strange run. It almost feels very much like a No More Mutants sort of thing, where they're reducing the number of players, reducing the amount of magic in order to increase the struggle. And I'm okay with that. Over at Thor, was that a bear riding Ghost Rider? Or is there some hidden sect of Marvel history that I am not familiar with? Because I could swear there was a dude riding a bear back in, I don't know if we call it necessarily prehistoric, but we'll say prehistoric America, and I think it was a Ghost Rider who rode a bear. And if that is the case, more please. Over at DC, I read Injustice, Year 5, number 23. That was a digital comic. And then I prepped myself for Rebirth with Superman 52 and Justice League number 50, along with We Are Robin number 12 and Omega Men number 12. Those last 2 were the last issues of those series. Omega Men, very poetic ending. The message, of course, being that war sucks. We Are Robin. I liked We Are Robin for its concept. I wasn't that big a fan of the end result, the characters. They did this Robin War event, but it kicked off way too early in the We Are Robin run. I would very much have liked to have these 12 issues and then close it out with an event book that more fully captures the theme of the book, which is the youth of Gotham City kind of look around themselves, decide that they don't like the way the city's going. They don the red and the green and the yellow of Robin, and each one becomes a Robin. Hence, We Are Robin. It's very much, think of it as a Occupy Wall Street except teenage vigilantes who go out and beat up criminals. And the last one is Rachel Rising 42. In my beta episode, I was saying that this might be my comic of the week that I was really going to dig into, but I kind of already did that with Captain America, and I'm going to be talking a lot about DC Rebirth #1. So all I'll say about this is I'm going to miss the series, but I'm happy that it is done and that I can now go back and binge the entire series again. I am very much the kind of guy that likes to binge comics the way that a lot of people will binge shows on Netflix where they'll wait for the season to be done so they can watch it all in one go. I like doing that with comic books, so I look forward to going back and doing it with Rachel Rising. This is the pull list, and this is kind of the reason that I was willing to go into more detail about the comics, because this week's pull list for me is really short. Normally have at least a handful of titles that I'm looking forward to reading. This week, I got 2. I have Green Lantern, Edge of Oblivion, #6, which I'm assuming is going to wrap that up and lead us into the Rebirth Green Lantern titles. We are getting 2 Green Lanterns and, boy, is it Hal Jordan and the Green Lantern Corps? Or something along those lines. So we're getting 2 Green Lantern monthly titles. And this is going to tell the story of where these lost lanterns have been. Right now, they're in a universe previous to our own and are trying to figure out how to escape before the universe collapses. The other book I'm going to read next week is Wonder Woman Rebirth, #1. And there is a single reason for this, and it is because Greg Rucka is going to be writing the book. He does a really good job of writing realistic, compelling female lead characters. I know he did a Wonder Woman run previously. I think that's the one where she had like the jeans and the leather jacket kind of look that a lot of people didn't like for some reason. I don't know. I dug it. I never read that run, so this will be my chance to see a Greg Rucka take on the most popular female character in all of comic books. I don't think that's going to be a comic that I'll necessarily stick with, but I can't say that for sure because I love all things Greg Rucka. Topic of the week. All right. Isn't that music fun? Wow, what a great musician I am, I guess. So we are talking DC Rebirth. So the splash page at the end of Rebirth 1 is kind of this big advertisement, and there's a whole lot of information sunk in there. This is a thing DC has been doing for a long time, where they like to release sort of teaser images, and it's just full of Easter eggs and little things you can go in and try and pick out. First, we have Donna Troy in the Black and Stars, so again, I believe she is also going to be in the Titans book. You have Tim Drake, who is no longer wearing the weird Red Robin costume that I personally was never a fan of with the big wings and all. And he is instead wearing something more similar of the Tim Drake Robin costume that we're used to seeing, except since he's Red Robin to differentiate himself from Robins that came before. So his Robin symbol is 2 R's, and I can't say I'm a fan of that. I don't like the name Red Robin. It makes me want a burger. And, it was an excuse for there to be multiple Robins, so you had to give Tim Drake a different name. But, I don't know, give him something different. Give him, Red Bird. So, don't let me name your heroes, but just Red Robin. I mean, makes me want a burger. Thing I am not so happy about, we see lots of Green Lanterns in this 2-page spread, but no Kyle Rayner. He's going to be in one of the comics. If they're going to have him around in the upcoming movie, you'd best believe that they're also going to have him in the comic for a while ahead of time to reestablish him as a Green Lantern and maybe get readers more familiar with him again before they come out with the movie. So with all of these different changes, these characters returning or leaving or costumes changing to look like old ones, really feels like the DCU exec team, and Jeff Johns at the head of it, is fixing things that people didn't like. It sounds like they're saying, all right, we get it. You don't like this new Superman. Fine, here's the old Superman. And they're saying, all right, we get it. You think the Red Robin costume is dumb. We're putting him back in a costume that looks like the old Robin costume. We're going to put Dick Grayson back in the Nightwing clothes. We're bringing back Wally West, who is kind of probably the biggest character from the 90s introduced during that post-crisis era, as the Flash anyway, that people really loved, and then suddenly it was, hey everybody, Barry Allen, the Silver Age Flash is back. Now we're doing a big event comic. Whoops, guess Wally West doesn't really exist anymore, at least not the way you knew him. And so I know there was a lot of Flash fans that were upset. So I'm sure, this is very much a way of them saying, all right, we did the New 52. Some things worked, some things didn't. So we're doing another event. We're going to restructure some things, put things back the way you liked them. If you really didn't like what we were doing, add a couple new things, try some things. But it really feels like they're trying to bring back the parts of the pre-Flashpoint, pre-New 52 universe in order to try and keep fans from maybe talking smack about the New 52. I don't know. There's been some neat stuff coming out of it, but for the most part, I don't think the New 52 really got that warm of a response, especially when they had issues with, the designs of characters, particularly female characters, which again, it's another thing they went to fix with Batgirl now very much wearing a much more functional sort of leather jacket outfit versus things like the redesigned Harley Quinn who was wearing next to nothing and, really tweaked off a lot of fans, especially female fans. Last bit about Rebirth. Big spoiler is it looks like they are bringing the Watchmen universe into contact with the New 52. It appears that Dr. Manhattan is the one behind everything. He's the one behind the New 52, which could suggest, the things I'm reading online could suggest that at the end of Watchmen, when Dr. Manhattan says he's going to go and try and create some of his own life and sort of leave our reality or leave that Earth, is maybe he created the New 52 universe. And it is true that if you know your DC lore, at the very beginning of the universe, the image that is always used is a massive hand with a big sort of swirling in the hand. Looks like a galaxy. Swirling in a massive hand is the origin of the DC universe. So it is entirely possible that that hand belonged to Dr. Manhattan. So I'll be interested to see what happens there. I am a fan of the original Watchmen. I think it'll be interesting to see them brought into the DCU, except for the fact that they were based off the original Charlton comic creations, where Rorschach is based off a character called The Question. Dr. Manhattan, I believe, was based off of the original Captain Atom, and that sort of thing. And those characters already exist in the DC universe, so you're sort of doubling up. It was kind of when they brought some of the Wildstorm characters in, when the Wildstorm imprint was combined with DC Comics, and you had characters that were very clearly sort of loose interpretations of existing DC characters. Like, my understanding was Midnighter was supposed to be very much a take on Batman, and now we have both Midnighter and Batman in the same universe, and I think there's a lot of confusion on the creative side as to how to reconcile those characters and have them in the same universe or working together when you basically have two of the same guy. So that's it for my topic of the week. I hope that was interesting. I know it was a lot. In further weeks, the topic of the week could be anything from a nerd rant to me explaining, sort of comic book 101, going into details on, hey, you have no idea who this character is, so let's talk about it a bit, to, I don't know, maybe it could be an interview with one of you guys. One of the big things I want this podcast to become is a source of dialogue between you guys and me. So I want to hear your thoughts. I'd love to hear your suggestions. If there's books you'd like me to review, give me your input. Don't be afraid to be blunt. Don't hurt me. I look forward to your input. So you can, of course, leave a review on this podcast, which is a great way for this podcast to grow, help other people find it, is if you leave me a rating and or a review. Otherwise, currently you can find me on Twitter. I don't have a website or an email set up for this podcast yet, but you can find me on Twitter at Noby. If you're an Evil Dead fan, it is a reference to the Evil Dead. Noby is spelled Knowby, so at Noby on Twitter. Feel free to follow me, send me a direct message, and we'll talk comics, man. So once again, this has been the Comic Box. A big thank you again to Void and Beej for letting me do this. A big thank you to you guys for listening, and I hope you enjoyed it. So until next time, my name's Rob, and I am closing the Comic Box. The Comic Box. The end. I wonder if I need some real music in there. No? No real music? Just the annoying voice stuff? All right then.